How's it going, everyone? This is Cloud Chief, and in today's video I wanted to talk about Voidwalker NMs. Voidwalker NMs are kind of interesting as they are NMs that you can't see until you physically pop them, but you can tell they're around by having some sort of abyssite and then kneeling down with the correct abyssite, and then if you are within 300 yalms of the NM, you'll actually be told the direction it is. If you get within 5 yalms of it and rest with the abyssite, you will actually pop the NM and it will be popped, claimed, and aggressive to you. You do want to kind of manipulate the type of abyssite you have so that way you can continue popping certain NMs the way you would want. The reason for this is you might want to keep popping one particular NM because you want to farm an item, or to actually be making your Empyrean weapon, as that is part of the progression process. Or you might need colorless souls to actually make the shield or harp inside Abyssea. You may even want to farm seals or +2 armor items for Empyrean armor within Abyssea. So we're going to go over how this works and how you can manipulate the abyssites. To get started, all you need to do is get a clear abyssite. You can get this from Acai Beam in Rulud Garden at G10 by just paying 1,000 gil. And he will give you a clear abyssite, and this will work for any of the NMs that are outside Abyssea in the normal Vana'diel world where they pop. To pop the Abyssea Voidwalkers, you need to get a clear Demaloom abyssite, and you get this from any of the crewer prospectors when you first enter the zone for 300 crewer. Just talk to the crewer prospector, go to key items, and it should be at the bottom of the list. Once you have one of these clear abyssites, you can start popping any of these NMs in any of the zones. Basically, you just need to go find one, kneel down, and kill it. You may or may not actually get the upgrade that'll go from clear to a colorful abyssite. Just so you are aware though, if you've actually progressed past Rhapsody Missions of Vana'diel, past 240, and you have the key item, Rhapsody in Mauve, for Abyssea only Voidwalkers, you will actually progress to the next tier for your abyssite 100% of the time. So now that you have a colorful abyssite, it starts to become more specific. You can get a clear to colorful from any zone, but now from the tier 2, the colorful abyssite, it will change to a specific color. And once it changes from the tier 2 to the tier 3 and a specific color abyssite, it is now specific for that zone. Like, for example, if you end up in Ottawa Chasm for Abyssea and you upgrade from a colorful abyssite to the Jade abyssite, it is now specific for only Ottawa Chasm for specifically popping the tier 3 Voidwalker, and you can't use that Jade abyssite anywhere else. However, you can now go back and get a clear and work on getting a colorful, so you can be holding a Jade and a colorful also. Be aware, by doing this, by holding the tier 3, then your tier 2 will never actually upgrade. So if you happen to want to go to Abyssea and you have the key item that always upgrades your abyssite, and for some reason you want to farm the tier 2 for, say, seal drops, then you would want to go through, get the tier 3, and then don't pop the tier 3 and go get a clear abyssite, get it upgraded to the now colorful, and now you can keep popping the colorful over and over and over again, and you won't actually have it upgraded to the tier 3. Just to note, since we are talking about holding multiple abyssites at this point, you don't ever really want to be holding on to a clear unless you are trying to upgrade to a colorful, and I'll get to why in a minute. But basically, don't ever hold a clear abyssite unless you are specifically trying to get a colorful abyssite. So this is where it can start becoming more complicated, and I think when people get confused about this whole system, this is where they get confused with holding multiple abyssites, as you can now potentially pop multiple different NMs, and you need to be very careful by the messages that you are getting on the screen when you kneel down. So just a quick note, Abyssea only goes up to tier 3, so you're only going to have the clear, the colorful, then specific color, and that's it for Abyssea zones. All the other zones outside of Abyssea that are just in regular Vanadil, there's actually 4 tiers. It'll actually go clear, then colorful, then go to a specific color. After you pop a tier 3, you have a chance of getting it upgraded to a tier 4, which will be black. Whenever you pop a tier 3, your abyssite will break, and you will have to now work on getting up to a tier 3 again every single time. Even if you have the Rhapsody key item, it's going to break as soon as you pop the tier 3. It's also something to be aware of, because as soon as one of these Voidwalker NMs no longer has hate on anyone, it will immediately go inactive and disappear. So if you end up losing hate for whatever reason while you have a tier 3, you just now lost your pop, as it is going to go inactive again, and then you would have to kneel down with a fresh tier 3 abyssite to pop it again. It will never actually depop. The only way to start its timer over again is to actually kill it. If you end up losing hate on it, or you end up dying and then it just goes inactive and kind of depops, even though it doesn't really depop, you can immediately pop it again as long as you have another tier 3, like someone else in your party has it. Also, these mobs move at flea speed when they are invisible, so sometimes they can be hard to pop. If you see the message that it says, "but emits no light," that means you cannot pop that NM because it's not currently up, or someone else is currently fighting it. So there's no NM that is poppable by resting with the current ones that you have. If it says that it emits a faint light, but there's nothing in the immediate area, that means you are currently outside of its 300 yalm range. Once you get within the range of a mob, it will then actually start telling you the distance to the mob. So now I want to jump in and talk about what typically confuses people the most, and this is the messages that pop up when you are resting. So when you rest, you'll get a message, and it is going to indicate the highest color abyssite you have for the zone. So if you have a tier 3 abyssite for that zone, it will say whatever color it is for that zone. Going back to the example for Ottawa, if you had the jade abyssite, it will say that your jade abyssite is twitching. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, the NM that you are tracking is the tier 3. So when you rest, it'll say whatever the highest tier you have for the zone, but then it'll also say that the abyssite is resonating, and it'll be a different message depending on what tier you're currently tracking. It'll be feebly if it is a tier 1, softly if it is a tier 2, solidly if it's a tier 3, and if you happen to have a tier 4 that's not an Abyssea, it will then be strongly. This is what you need to be careful of, so that way you are not popping the wrong NM. So say you happen to have a tier 3 and a tier 2, and say we're farming colorless souls and we want to, keep popping tier 3s because we want to get as many colorless souls as possible. You wouldn't want to then kill the tier 2 and then wait for the tier 2 to pop before you would have a tier 3 again, so that way you could turn around and pop the tier 3 again as soon as it respawns. So we would need to make sure when we rest that we are getting the message that says solidly and not softly, as it is always going to be indicating the color of the tier 3. It will always track the closest NM, so if there are multiple NMs on top of each other, you need to be very careful that you're popping the correct one that you want and trying to make sure you keep them split. The other problem is if you're holding multiple abyssites, it then becomes difficult to tell if the NM that you want is up. So say I am, again, trying to go for the tier 3s in Abyssea, and I have a tier 3 and a tier 2. If the tier 3 happens to be down, I'm never going to then get the message that there's no NMs up unless I go ahead and kill the tier 2, because the tier 3's down, so there's no way it'll track it, so it's always going to be picking up that it's tracking the tier 2. This is one of two main reasons why you never want to be carrying a clear abyssite unless your goal is to upgrade that clear to a colorful. as for the tier 1s, there are an overabundance of tier 1s that run around the zone, therefore making it much more likely that you're going to be tracking a tier 1 as opposed to a tier 2 or tier 3 or even potentially a tier 4. And the other reason is the fact that when you go to pop, you're going to be popping most likely tier 1s because there's, again, an overabundance of them. By keeping track of the message, you can basically control what NMs you're going to get, and even in some cases holding the tier 3 and making sure you're only tracking the tier 2. The key is really in watching that message, and you basically want to ignore what color it says when you rest. Just be aware of which ones that you have for any given zone, and then just be very cautious of what message you're getting, whether it's softly or solidly or strongly. And that about sums up the Voidwalker system and how it works and how best you can use it to manipulate to make sure you're getting the NM that you want and you're maximizing your time efficiently for popping these NMs so you can make the most progress. The system can be a little complicated, and I've definitely talked to people that have been very confused by this. So hopefully this clears up any questions, or if you weren't even aware of something, it gave some clarity on that for you. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for supporting the channel. And as always, may you have success in all you do.